This project is funded through the Government of Canada Outbound Student Mobility Pilot Project, with many thanks to Universities Canada. We'd like to acknowledge that the University of Guelph resides on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize that today, this gathering places home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Acknowledging the land reminds us of our commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and lands. We know we have colleagues from across Canada and other parts of the world joining us for this webinar. If you'd like to find the land acknowledgement for where you are, you can go to the whos.land website, or you can Google Whose Land. Here are some ground rules for the webinar. Please mute your mic if you are not talking. You can turn on live captions under More Actions on Teams. The slides and voiceover will be sent out to participants after the presentation. You can ask questions by raising your hand and unmuting when called on, or you can type your questions in the chat. We would ask everyone to adhere to the principles of dignity and respect for all. There will be an extended discussion period at the end of the webinar. There are 3 parts to today's program. First, the project overview, then the method, and finally, the reentry program development and design. Now I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Mike, who will introduce our team.
The reentry project was a joint effort between the Center for International Programs, the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute, and Open Learning and Educational Support Unit. First, I would like to introduce the CIP members involved in the project. The Director and International Liaison Officer, Dr. Lynn Mitchell, the Study Abroad Manager, Allison Broadbent, the International Education Intern, Jacqueline Veras, and the Education Abroad Advisors, Chen Chen, and myself, Mike LaFleur. Next, we have Samantha Blostein, the Global Learning Specialist at CESI, as well as Dr. Victoria Kennedy, the Distance Learning Program Development Specialist at OpenEd. We will have an opportunity to hear from each team member throughout the webinar. Our reentry project focused on 2 main objectives. First, to understand the challenges that students face upon returning from their international experience, particularly those who have historically been underrepresented in international learning experiences. And secondly, to enhance reentry supports required to assist students to reflect on their international experiences from a cultural lens and transition to the workforce. To meet these objectives, we implemented 3 main activities. First, we focused on research. We conducted a literature review, interviews, and a survey, which we'll hear more about shortly. Secondly, we used the research to revise our current online reentry course. And third, we designed a unique educational interactive virtual space for students to reflect and showcase their intercultural learning.
In this section, we're going to talk about the methods, findings, and recommendations from our research. We'll start off with the methods. Initially, we wanted to conduct 10 interviews, so we sent out our recruitment email to the offices and the student clubs and organizations that we felt supported these underrepresented groups of students that we were looking to hear from. And we were overwhelmed with the responses. So we ended up doubling our interviews and conducting 20 semi-structured interviews with students who had returned from abroad. But we also wanted to hear from the students that we didn't get to interview. So we sent out a survey that touched on the topics that we discussed in the interviews, and that way we could compare and contrast the results after. For both the interviews and the surveys, we asked students to self-identify. That way we knew who we were talking to and the unique experiences that they had. As you can see on this slide, we tried to select our interviewees based on their diverse identities and intersectionalities. We also asked students what type of international experience they had, because our reentry program is designed for all students who have studied abroad, not just those who went through our office. For the survey, as you can see, there's diverse representation in the responses that we collected. However, there were fewer Black and Indigenous student responses than we had initially hoped for. But in both the interview and the surveys, we found that 75% or more of the students identified as eligible for needs-based financial assistance. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Chen to talk about the findings.
The findings from the reentry research can be grouped into the following 4 themes. First, career implications and skill development. Second, identity. Third, transitions back to Canada. And fourth, reentry programming. In terms of career implications and skill development, establishing a clear direction for their future academic and career goals was one of the main benefits of an international experience, which was often viewed as a turning point. Most students either shifted their career or academic path or affirmed their passion for a specific field. The international experience enabled students to see themselves studying, working, or traveling abroad, having established a broader outlook. With regards to developing soft skills, adaptability and communication skills were often mentioned. Students reported to have to adjust their communication styles when they are traveling abroad, such as using gestures to add with communication or be more mindful with people's tones. Students also need to adapt to social norms in everyday settings as well as in more subtle ways. For example, students who identified as members of the LGBTQ2S+ community reported having to act more cautiously when navigating disclosure of sexual orientation while they were abroad. In terms of communicating the hard and soft skills, students who participated in a work, volunteer, or research placement abroad were able to articulate more concrete examples of hard skill gained from international experience as compared to students who studied abroad. With regards to soft skills, students reported to have developed the skills including a greater sense of self-awareness, responsibility, independence, interpersonal skills, and second language skills. While students could articulate examples of how they gained these skills, students also find it difficult to express the value of this experience in a sense of transferable employability skills. When it comes to identity, overall, when students were asked about the impact of their identity on their international experience, 4 major themes emerged. First, a deeper connection to cultural and social identity and the Canadian identity. Several BIPOC students reported that their international experience helped them to further embrace their cultural or social or racial identity. One BIPOC student claimed to have a greater sense of comfort living in a country where their cultural or racial identity was part of the dominant culture. For some students, being Canadian helped them to integrate and feel more accepted when abroad. And students reported to experience a heightened sense of their identity as a Canadian while they're traveling abroad. The second theme is identity and issues of microaggressions, harassment, and stereotypes. With regards to identity, the theme of safety also emerged. Students who identified as female noted that being a woman traveling alone actually made the situation a little bit harder because they need to constantly be aware of their own safety. Similarly, one student who identified as BIPOC noted that she received a lot of unwanted flirtation based on her gender and ethnicity. Students who identified as LGBTQ2S+ community also expressed safety concerns with regards to disclosing their sexual orientation and dealing with discrimination and homophobic slurs. Such examples suggested the need for international offices to review their pre-departure and re-entry training to ensure the issues of microaggressions and discrimination are addressed, particularly for students who identified as LGBTQ2S+ and BIPOC. The third theme is overcoming isolation. Underrepresented group of students reported to draw support from connecting with individuals and communities that share their cultural and social backgrounds while they are abroad. For example, students who identified as BIPOC expressed the importance of seeking friends of the same cultural and racial background when they are traveling. And the fourth theme is navigating white privilege. Navigating white privilege was also expressed by several white students. Some white students placed in West Africa or Asia, for example, reported being viewed in higher regard based on their skin color, and some students questioned their Western and white privilege. In terms of transition back to Canada, during students' transitions back to Canada, the main theme that emerged was the fact that students were often dealing with conflicting emotions and instability because of the quick transition back to schooling or employment. For example, students often spoke to the positive elements of their international experience, while at the same time highlighted the challenge of transitioning between different homes, readjusting to academic system, and adapting to a slower pace of life upon reentry. Overall, a wide range of conflicting emotions were discussed in the various interviews. With regards to reentry programming, three main themes emerged. First, a strong student desire for reentry programming. Students indicated a strong desire for a reflective reentry program. When asked if it would be beneficial to have such a program in place, students overwhelmingly supported the idea. Second, a call for connection, check-ins, and supports. With regards to developing a re-entry program, several recommendations emerged, including the need for group connections, counseling services, and check-ins. Several students called for a deeper sense of connection and a peer community to share their experience. And third, in terms of addressing mental health, career advising, and a call for flexible programming, access to different supports at various times during their re-entry experience may be an important consideration, or extended access to these re-entry supports so students may access them when they have the time to process and appreciate the resources available. In terms of structuring the re-entry program, students highlighted the need for flexibility. Some suggested activities could be a combination of written reflection or activities, group debrief, help with transitions, reflections on skills, and how to translate or articulate these skills into their professional domain. Students also emphasized that the structure of the program should accommodate various learning needs and with the option to remain anonymous. Now I will pass the presentation to Samantha, who will walk us through the recommendation from the research.
Our research points to recommendations in three areas: implications for reentry programming, implications for pre-departure, and implications for promoting program. In terms of implications for reentry programming, students reported a need to create inclusive spaces during and after an outbound mobility experience. They reported that their family and friends could not relate to their experience. As such, reentry programming should create a space for students to connect and validate their experience amongst peers of common identity and cultural background. Reentry phase is often a transient period for students as they experience in many cases a deep sense of loss, disorientation, disconnect, and struggle adjusting to life back home. Reentry programming should be delivered in a flexible manner that helps students articulate their emotions and feelings, reflect on how their identity impacted their experience, and reflect on how their intercultural skills translate to the workplace. In terms of communicating transferable skills, students had difficulty expressing the value or application of their international experience and often struggled to make the link with their experience and identifying the professional skills they acquired that will be crucial to their transition to the workforce. This suggests a beneficial focus area for reentry supports to help students reflect on and identify the transferable employability skills gained through their international learning experience. In terms of implications for pre-departure, international offices should emphasize the interplay of identity and safety and how this is impacted within different cultural contexts. Students who participate in an outbound mobility program should have training that prepares them to reflect on their identity and anticipate how they may have to navigate issues such as privilege, stereotypes, harassments, and microaggressions. Students should be equipped with learning activities that help them to contemplate how they might navigate sensitive topics, what those implications may be in a different cultural context, and how to deal with issues of discrimination related to their identity, such as sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, as well as dealing with feelings of isolation. In terms of the implications for promoting programs, in our research, we heard from BIPOC students who told us they valued travel that could help them gain a new understanding of their cultural or racial identities. Promoting study abroad as a way of exploring identity may appeal to many students. For example, LGBTQ2S+ students may be drawn to programs that give them a comfortable opportunity to understand sexual identity in a different cultural context. Promoting programs with diverse student identities in mind could help traditionally underrepresented students see themselves in our programs. In terms of the conclusions from our research, while underrepresented students reported the benefits of participating in an international experience as deepening their career identity, they faced difficulties articulating the skills that they gained abroad. Returning from an international experience also posed challenges. Underrepresented students expressed the need for further check-ins, administrative and counseling supports, and most of all, a space to connect with other students to discuss and validate their international learning experiences. For international offices, these findings raise the following questions. Are we providing underrepresented students with adequate strategies and supports to address discrimination and associated issues of microaggressions, harassment, and stereotypes? Are we providing the inclusive, accessible spaces necessary that allow students to form networks, share their stories, and find support in one another? And are we providing students with adequate tools and resources to articulate the skills they gain during their international experience? We hope that the findings and recommendations presented from our research will provide some food for thought to inform these discussions at your institutions.
By means of introducing you to our fully online self-directed reentry course, I want to highlight 3 aspects of the course design: microlearning, interactivity, and badging. Microlearning. We took a microlearning approach to this module, which means we aim to provide short, focused bursts of information to learners. And during content development, we were mindful of what information would most benefit a learner at this stage of the experience, so that we could ensure that content was short, but very relevant. This is a fully online asynchronous course, which means that learners can access this content at a time that works best for them. So if they're attending full-time study, working, they can access this during lunch breaks, in the evenings, early mornings, or on weekends as suits them. The course is skill-focused, and it aims to help learners move from understanding their experiences to applying the skills they gained and developed abroad in their present educations and in their careers going forward. Topics in the course include activities to build competencies, and the 3 modules that make up the course each have a quiz at the end to assist learners in ensuring that they've synthesized and have attained those competencies. Interactivity. So by integrating interactive technologies into the course website, we're able to grab the learner's attention and encourage them to engage with the activity deeply. With activities that are primarily reflective in nature, it really helps to start with something concrete that the learner can do. For example, as you see here in my screenshot on the left-hand side, dragging emotions into categories that represent how often the learner feels that particular emotion. We have them do this before we ask them to reflect on the significance of their emotions. The team at the Center for International Programs have received feedback from students that suggested students were craving connection with others who had studied abroad. We employed the discussions tool in our learning management system to create an organized space where students can share and connect with one another. The capstone activity for the course, the postcard gallery, is the only required discussion, and it's only required if the learner wants to earn the re-entry badge, which we'll get to in a moment. But other discussion areas aim to create micro-communities for students of color, LGBTQ2S+ students, students who travel to the same regions, and others who want to connect with their peers who share aspects of their identity and experience. And finally, badging. The team at the Center for International Programs wanted to recognize that the re-entry experience is significant and that unpacking your international experience is a process that involves work. In doing this work, learners come away with vocabulary to describe their skills and frameworks to put their skills into practice in their learning and their work going forward. So we decided to create a re-entry badge to acknowledge the work that learners do when taking this course. This digital badge, which is a form of micro-credential, also serves as an added incentive to draw learners to this optional course. To get into more of the details of the course, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lynn Mitchell.
Thanks, Victoria. So based on what we found out from our research and the design principles that Victoria has talked about, we set out to design a re-entry program that would really serve the needs of students. We know they wanted something flexible, asynchronous, so of course they can work on it at 2 in the morning if they need to. Engaging, reflective, they really wanted a structure by which they could look back on what they've learned and make sense of it. And they wanted connection with other students who have had similar experiences. So the course entails 3 modules and a final assignment. First module about self-awareness, second module, intercultural competence. Module 3 looks at employability, and their final assignment is a postcard, as Victoria has already mentioned, and we'll show you a little bit more about all of these in the next few slides. But first, a look at the underpinning of the course being Kolb's experiential learning cycle, that students need to think about the experience they had, reflect on it, understand what it means, and think about how they're going to utilize that going forward to continue to learn. We rephrased Kolb's learning cycle a bit to make it a little easier for students to think through. So what happened? Why do you think this happened? What did you learn? And how will you apply this learning in the future? So every module in the course has activities that go back to these questions over and over again. We'll see that a little bit as we move forward. So we're going to look at each of these modules individually. Quick look at the table of contents for module 1, all about self-awareness, a lot of the feelings that come up for students when they return, a look at their identities and how they may have changed or how they've grown since they've been away, and some of the health and wellness issues that we want them to address when they return, including mental health. So the learning outcomes for this module really based around the things I just mentioned that you saw in the table of contents, and focusing on what kinds of support students may feel they need once they reflect on some of the things that we've asked them to think about. A look at some of the course content in module 1. We wanted students to reflect on their identities and how aspects of their identities may have influenced their experience abroad and what aspects may have changed since their return. To get them started, we created this identity wheel so they can explore various aspects of identity, understand how each is defined, and we even created a blank spot for things that may not be listed here. Once students felt they understood that content, they could then complete their own identity wheel worksheet reflecting on how their identity might have felt different while they were abroad and what aspects have changed since their return.
This really provides the structure for students to understand how they have changed as a result of their international experience. The next module is about intercultural competence. And although they would have gotten some of this content in pre-departure orientation, that was a long time ago. So this module covers some of the theory, gets them to reflect on their own intercultural competence and what they can do to continue to develop it further. Learning outcomes for Module 2 really center around a deeper understanding of what intercultural competency is. They get to identify their own strengths and weaknesses and evaluate how their experience abroad may have contributed or how maybe they missed out on some opportunities to develop intercultural competence and some concrete strategies to continue that intercultural development now that they're home.
Some course content here. We have a short video that explains Deardorff's process model of intercultural competency acquisition in terms that students can maybe relate to. There's a voiceover that goes with this video. I'm not going to play it all here, but this is just to give you an idea of the different ways we tried to present content in a way that kept students engaged. This is an example of one of the activities to give students that structure in order to reflect on their intercultural strengths and weaknesses. If I were a student, I might be saying, yes, I showed respect for the culture I was in, but maybe I wasn't always that open and sometimes I judged a bit, but I did demonstrate curiosity and I really wanted to learn. This last piece of that module is meant to help students identify ways they can develop their intercultural competency moving forward. We didn't just want to leave them with that feeling that maybe they did or maybe they didn't make the best use of their time abroad in terms of their intercultural development, but what can you do now that you're back? This module gives them checklists, resources, volunteer opportunities, and concrete ways to develop a plan to continue their intercultural development. This last module is about taking those intercultural skills and many of the other skills that they developed while they were abroad and getting students to list and articulate those skills in ways that can contribute to their employability. Learning outcomes for this module, students get to develop their own transferable skills inventory and then use specific examples of how they demonstrated those skills while abroad and articulate them on a resume, cover letter, or in an interview. This is another example of course content. This is a sample inventory of transferable skills students may have developed abroad. Note that many of these are the same skills a student could get in a summer job at home, but we've tried to give examples that pertain to an international experience. The list is long and we tried to categorize these skills as you can see here. Students are then given their own transferable skills worksheet to create an inventory of the skills they feel they developed while abroad. Once they have an inventory of their skills, we can take them through some content explaining how to articulate these in a job interview, for example. Many of you will be familiar with the STAR acronym that gets used to help people articulate their skills in a certain way in a job interview setting. This is an example of how we tried to use flip cards to demonstrate the content in a way that students would find engaging. You'll recall that our research team mentioned that students really wanted to connect with others who had similar experiences abroad. Sometimes that might be because students had gone to the same country, but our research with students in underrepresented groups showed that sometimes they really need to connect with others whose identity had influenced their experience abroad in similar ways. As Victoria and our educational design folks helped us think through this, we came up with discussion forums where students can connect with others who may have a shared common experience to discuss. The final assignment, as Victoria mentioned, is for students to design a postcard that would reflect their learning abroad. Students are given a template which they can complete with a photo and a short description as a culminating assignment. And other course participants can see it and upvote postcards that resonate for them and their experience. This can also contribute to the sense of connection that students told us they wanted. And a final look at the badge that students get when they complete the course gives them that sense of accomplishment, that they've managed to do the reflections and things that are in the course, and they have something to show for it. And now I think we're going to go to questions. Jacqueline's going to facilitate that. It's been a lot to take in, I'm sure, and we'll hopefully have a good discussion.